Thank you for joining California Competes' 10th anniversary interview series. Today, I'll be speaking with University of California President Michael V. Drake. President Drake was appointed the 21st president of the University of California in August 2020. He oversees the UC's world-renowned system of 10 campuses, 5 medical centers, 3 nationally affiliated labs, more than 280,000 students, and 230,000 faculty and staff. President Drake previously served as the president of The Ohio State University from 2014 through June 2020. Prior to OSU, he served in several roles at the University of California, including 9 years as chancellor of UC Irvine and 5 years as system-wide vice president for health affairs. An ophthalmologist by training, President Drake received much of his post-secondary training here in California. His bachelor's from Stanford University, his MD and residency at UCSF, and his fellowship training in ophthalmology at UCSF. President Drake, thank you so much for joining me today. The California Competes 10th anniversary interview series engages higher education and workforce development leaders around California's thorniest issues you must think about every day as you guide the UC to ensure it not only stays stable in these volatile and uncertain times, but also continues to innovate and lead not only in our state, but the nation and the world. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you very much for having me. It's great to be here, Dr. Jez, and the entire California Competes team. I appreciate so much your commitment to higher education and the really great work that you do for higher education and workforce development. And so we're really pleased to be a partner with you in this work.
You've been president of the University of California for more than a year now. Looking back over the past 12 months, what are you most proud of?
Oh gosh, this has been, looking back over the last 12 months is something many of us don't want to do. I mean, this has really been a very difficult last year. And so I'd say that if I look back, there are some things though that are sources of pride, really. One is the way that our students and faculty and staff really changed their method of doing business to something that would fit in this new world. Our students and faculty in particular had to adjust within days or weeks to going online. Faculty and students who are doing research had to adjust that on immediately to be virtual. So that was something. Then our staff who support all of these efforts in so many ways had to adjust to working at home. And then the entire group, like everyone, had to balance home life and work life together in ways that weren't the case before, taking care of young children or elderly parents, a whole variety of things. But we were able to do that and keep things moving forward. So I'm very, very proud of the work of the entire enterprise and continuing to move forward during these really difficult times. There are a couple other things that we did this last year that I'm proud of. We were dealing with the COVID crisis as everyone, and it's true for everyone in the world. We also were focusing on the place of racism, institutional racism, and social injustice in the United States. And so we put together an anti-racism task force, and there were a whole series of other campus efforts that really focused their time and attention on making what we can do that today and tomorrow and in the years to come to make us a better, more inclusive, more welcoming enterprise to really work on being anti-racist. And so I'm pleased that work continued. We have a new campus community safety platform that was created and was released. Actually, people representing thousands of students, faculty, staff, and others, community members and others contributed to that. So really pleased to have that come out over the year. And then a couple of other things, that are points of pride, I guess, because they're sort of points of validation. We had there were 6 Nobel Prizes last year. We shared in part of 3 of them, so that's great for our one little university in the whole wide world. I mean, it was great that we got that recognition really for work that people have been doing for decades. Both Forbes and U.S. News and World Report came out with rankings, and we did well, as we normally do with U.S. News and World Report rankings. 6 of the top 10 public universities, and all in the top 100 public universities on U.S. News. So that was great. Forbes actually changed their methodology to give a little more credit to who you are educating and who you admitted to your university, which I think is great. What I push back on U.S. News, I think that U.S. News gives too much credit to who you've rejected. You know, that they look at that a lot, how exclusive you can be, that gives you high rankings. I want us to be inclusive and engaging and do well. And so Forbes changed their methodology to be more focused on who you're actually educating and how broadly you can do that. And when doing that, public universities did better than they do under the U.S. News rubric. And we were really pleased that UC Berkeley ranked as #1 in the country among all public and private universities. And we had 4 in the top 20. So that was terrific. And then all of our universities did well. Forbes only looks at about 20% of the universities, and all of our universities, even our newest one, UC Merced, made that list as being among the best. So we love things that we win, and I'm really pleased that we won. We did better based on the fact that they took a step back and said, well, what are you actually doing in this? And, you know, there's the research, the teaching, the education, all those things. Who are you actually incorporating in your enterprise? And that really vaulted us to the top, and I'm very proud of that.
Wow, a lot's been happening, and I wrote down your quote. We love things that we win. And there's definitely a lot of winning happening. Congratulations on all of that. You mentioned a number of things that are shared priorities with California Competes, and I was happy to hear you mention them. The focus around racial equity and racial justice, and the role of online ed, and perhaps, you know, it was a real challenge this year, and then the sudden shift, and so many people did what they needed to do to make things work as well as possible. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the future of online and hybrid in the UC, and do you see a role for online ed and hybrid to broaden access? And you talked about the critical role of public universities with regards to being inclusive. And so I have to say, at California Competes, we've been thinking about, you know, how could this be a tool, you know, if we could figure out how to have equitable outcomes with online to increase access.
Yes. Well, there's a lot there. Let me see if I can do this. You mentioned that stuff. We love things that we win. We do. You know what I really love, being honest, is we love things that we win where we didn't know there was a competition. So we didn't know that Forbes was going to change the way, improve the way that they evaluated universities. We were doing things as in the best way we knew how, and we're happy that their re-examination of how they were ranking universities then supported and validated that. We had this happen a couple of years ago. New York Times began a ranking of universities, and again, they were looking at social mobility and what universities did to help with social mobility. And that the first couple of years that came out, UC Irvine, where came out tops in the country in their measure of social mobility. And again, we'd done all the things we did before they even began to rank them. So it's great to do things and then have people take a step back and say, well, let's ask questions about who's doing something well. And it turns out to be what you were doing all along.
And that was when you were leading UC Irvine, is that right?
So the first year this came out was 2015, and I left there in 2014. So their data the first year was my last year there was they led to their data, and then we'd done things that were perpetual, so it kept on going and doing really, really well in that. And that was really looking broadly at the diversity of the class, the number of Pell students, the places that they came from, and then the graduation rates and other things, given that diversity of students, which we thought was so important. But when you have narrow entry criteria and you have a very small group of highly motivated, highly talented people, they're going to do great. And that's terrific. And we celebrate that, and we know that, and we expect that it's an important thing. It's something different though when you're many times larger and you have many, and you haven't said, well, you have to be an A+, whatever, even to walk in the door. And so if we can be broader in the people that we include, and then elevate that broader group of people, that to me is even more meaningful. It's a big part of what we feel is important as a public institution. Let me answer your question, though. You asked about online and virtual education, and I think that first, it's a larger part of what we're doing today. It will be a larger part of what we're doing next week and next month. It will be a larger part of what we're doing next year. It will make us better. We have to adjust and learn and perfect it, but it will continue to make us better. So I think that's a good thing. I don't see it as instead of, I see it as an adjunct to the residential and in-person education that we believe works so well and adds so much value. But I think there are places that it can add. We've seen it in our telemedicine programs where we went to no elective procedures and only virtual elective visits in the spring of 2020. So now we're about 75, 80% in-person visits, but we have 20, 30% of our visits are still virtual. And in fact, the combination of in-person plus virtual means we see actually more patients today than we would have seen 2 years ago. So we're back to more than 100%. And I don't know about you or others who might be watching the tape, but I've done this on the kind of Hollywood squares of Zoom screens, where I've said how many people on the screen have had a virtual visit to a healthcare provider in the last year, and almost everybody raises their hand, yes. And I say, and how many in the future, if you have a choice of virtual or of having some of your visits virtual versus having all of them in person, how many will choose to have some of them virtually? And everybody says absolutely yes. And so at least for some of them, it's the preference of the patients. We find that in mental health care, that it's been the preference of most people, that it's you get much of the value and you remove a lot of the hassle from driving, parking, waiting, everything for that in-person, that one-to-one connection. So we think that will continue to be a large part of mental health. And then to the other part of your question, what about places where, if we look at the broad diversity of our constituencies, do we think that greater use of virtual means of connectivity will help? And I'm 100% sure that that's the case. We're able to get to people, or people can get to us much more conveniently through digital means than they can through many other means, cost and time and off work and all those kinds of things. We think we'll be able to reach more people. Our students will be able to reach more students. What we'll have to do then is to focus really on the digital divide and make sure that everyone has full access to effective broadband. And we're working with others to make sure that that's the case. We consider it now as a part of our basic needs profile for our students. And I think this will be can really be a pathway to a more equitable future.
Yeah. You also mentioned the impact of the pandemic in the past year or so on those that have dependents, parents. Yeah. I wasn't sure if you were talking about student parents. This is something that at California Competes, we have a new policy agenda around and are doing work around supporting student parents or Californians who are parents who want to go to college to make sure that's doable. Were you talking about student parents? And if so, will you talk a little bit about how the UC is thinking about that?
Yeah, I was really talking about all of the above. What I found in Zooms with groups of students, like our student body presidents would meet from time to time, some number of them would have a younger sibling running back and forth in the background, who they were caring for or helping with homework or whatever else, in addition to their normal work. So there was an extra burden there. Some of them also then were taking care of or supporting their parents. Our faculty in particular would be supporting elderly parents. And so there's the home support component of this was an extra burden for so many of our people, to be honest, particularly women. And so we really want to acknowledge and recognize how the pandemic has different effects on different people. And then you mentioned finally the concept that a significant fraction of our students now are students who have children. And I'm old. I used to make this reference to Dobie Gillis. There was an old TV show called Dobie Gillis that would have been only on Nickelodeon reruns or something. But where a college student was somebody 18 to 22, who went to the games and whatever else. And we know that we think broadly about who's in college today, that most students are what would have been called non-traditional students. They're older, they're parts of families, they're veterans, a whole variety of things. They've come back to school later in life. And all of those are a part of our community now. We just have to be thoughtful about the ways that we work to support them.
Yeah, we agree. It's critical for our state. to figure out how do we serve these students who want to come to college later, need to come to college later. So like the rest of the world, California has been turned upside down in this pandemic, and a number of the things that you had mentioned around the UC's response. Could you talk specifically around how's the UC supporting the state's economic recovery, especially for those populations that have been most adversely affected?
Yeah, so a couple of things there. First, we're a very large employer. We have about 225,000 employees, so we're a very, very large employer. And a couple of things. One of the things we did last year that you mentioned things that I was pleased and proud of the university for doing. We had a jobs protection plan. And so we could have put it in place about a year ago. And its rubric was we were not going to lay off anyone for economic reasons during the COVID crisis. And so from the fall of last year through this last summer, we worked on ways to transfer or retrain or otherwise protect our workers. And we saved, we know of 1,600 jobs in the fall of last year. We think this would have saved even more throughout the year. And we were pleased to be able to get through the worst of the financial crisis for the university through the spring and into the summer and be able to support those jobs for those families. So that was a specific thing that our chancellors and leaders across the campus had to do. So we appreciate that. About half of our workforce works in the health sciences, health services. So they're working at hospitals and clinics. And so that group of people have been working the whole time. In fact, they've been working harder than ever in their lives. And so we've done all that we could, first to keep them safe. That's critically important. And second, to try to support them psychologically and otherwise to make sure that they know that the work that they're doing, the life-saving work that they're doing as we speak, is truly appreciated and is not taken for granted. So we've tried hard to support them. And then we believe very much in creating a safe workplace for our faculty, for our staff, and then for our students. And so we have policies on campus that I believe will be the things that are necessary to create the safest possible workplace and safest possible place to go to school. We had a very good experience with this last year. Again, a good experience and a bad time. But our campuses worked as relative bubbles. We had campus transmission infectivity rates, as a rule, about 10% of those of the surrounding communities. If the surrounding community had a 3% case positivity rate, we on the campus were seeing a 0.3% case positivity rate. And those things happened throughout the year. In fact, in the spring, we got to campuses that had 0 cases over weeks at a time. We worked really hard to keep the campuses safe. And then our policies for people returning to work, which require vaccines and masking, as has been widely reported, I think is the best way that we can keep campuses safe as we move into the fall. And we'll continue to monitor that. But I think that's our plan as we move forward.
Earlier announced this year, the UC admitted its most racially diverse undergraduate class in history. How do you plan to build on that momentum?
We believe in access, affordability, and excellence. We've done some things to enhance affordability dramatically this last year. Very proud of that, and that will continue to bear fruit as we move forward. And we'll make it so that most students will be able to go to the university. They might put some work in, but will be able to go and graduate debt-free. There'll be a pathway to debt-free education. And then we think about access broadly, and that means that we want people from all zip codes in California and honestly from other places in the country and around the world to be able to aspire to a UC education and to see a pathway forward. We're happy that the class a year ago was the most diverse that we had ever welcomed, and then we admitted, and then the class that graduated was the most diverse we'd ever graduated, and then the new class is more diverse than the one that we had admitted last year. And we believe that this is only us doing a better job of getting closer to reflecting the people of the state of California. So it's an ongoing daily work to be inclusive of the people who are us, and to make it that the university it's not a them and the us. It's all of us together. And so we'll keep working on that. And I. I've been at the university for a while. What I can see is that we're making progress. Things look different than they looked 10 and 20 and 30 years ago. And we just have to keep it up. It's not rapid, but we can see it changing.
So you had mentioned, the role of access and affordability and the debt-free path. And I wanted to flag, the other headline that the UC has made this year was when the UC regents voted to raise tuition, and trying to think about college affordability, a major concern for Californians. We hear so much that, post-secondary education is the key to economic and social mobility. So can you talk more about the debt-free path and how the UC is trying to protect access for low-income Californians?
Well, yes, great. And in fact, the tuition stabilization plan and that came really does make the university more affordable. 60% of our students nearly pay no tuition now and pay no tuition in the future. And what this plan does for a couple of reasons, it's a cohort plan. So it goes up a year. Your tuition is a little higher than last year's, but then it stays stable for 6 years going forward. And we have a return to aid component of that. And so actually, as tuition goes up, there's more money returned to the need-based aid pool. And so for the 60% of our students who pay no tuition, that increased money from in the need-based aid pool means that actually with this new tuition plan, college is more affordable to them than it would have been in the old plan. For about 20%, it's roughly the same. And it's only the students from the top 20% of the income distribution that will end up paying a little bit more, a few $100s more per year as they go through. But those are families in the $180,000 to $200,000 a year or more range. Yes, their tuition will go up by a few $100s a year, but once it goes up, it then stays stable and flat for 6 years. And actually that planning makes it quite much more affordable for those. That stability is a good thing for those families as well. So the cohort tuition plan actually provides more money for need-based aid for the 2/3 or so of our students who need that the most, and their debt loads leaving will be lower in this plan than had we left tuition the same. As it moves forward, it's 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, it's a year at a time. When it's fully mature, that means 4 or 5 years from now, the need-based aid pool will have expanded enough that will widen the pathway to debt-free education for the students that are coming in. And we think that we'll have to continue working on this, but the goal is to make it that everyone, with a modicum of work, it's not free, it's not a gift, it's a debt-free pathway. But with a modicum of work, we believe that most students will be able to see their way from beginning to a UC degree and graduate without debt. So we're very pleased about that.
Well, I feel like if there's one thing that COVID taught us is the value of predictability and stability and certainty. So yes. I'm sure at least that's welcome news. And I think about, for students of color are much more debt averse than others. And that could be a real barrier when a family is to take out a loan. That can be enough to,
yes,
keep from higher ed. So
you just say that, I'm just repeat again, because it's sort of counterintuitive that you change cohort tuition by 4 or 5%. Oh my goodness, that looks like it's going to be more. But again, 60% roughly of our students paid no tuition today. That it's Pell and UC grants and Cal grants cover that. So they pay no tuition today. That's most of our students. They'll pay none in the future. And then the increased tuition that's paid by the higher income families go first to support the university and professors and all things we need to support us there. But some of that money goes back to supporting our need-based aid pool. So the aid packages actually increase, and you're paying no tuition and your aid package increases. It actually makes the university more affordable. We did this when I was at Ohio State, and what we saw was, and we did it in 2016, so we had some years to watch it roll forward. And what we wanted to happen, and then what we saw happen. We did some other things as well, but what we saw happen was that the number of students who graduated with no debt continued to increase. And those students who had debt when they graduated were graduating with less debt than the students from the years before. And so as that moves forward, that you get a greater and greater number of people graduating with no debt, the amount of debt that students who have to take out debt goes lower and lower until you get that to a minimum. And so it was a very important positive thing for us 5 years ago there. And I think as we look back on the next 5 years, it's going to be, the university will become more affordable, particularly for middle and lower income students and their families.
Right. I think for the probably the policy wonks watching this is thinking about I feel like what we would call in slang the high tuition, high aid. I probably don't like high tuition, but if we can subsidize someone, so let's subsidize the lower income
Yes,
Californians and not those that can afford to pay more.
yes,
So that makes
absolutely
a lot
right.
of sense, even though it's not a good soundbite, I guess.
These many of the problems that we work on are not simple problems, and so we can't think of just a simple catchphrase. But you were exactly right. So we know high tuition, high aid, and how that works. And you and I both were students at Stanford, and we know that Stanford and Harvard and Princeton, great high tuition, high aid, that can be very effective. So their tuition is 4 times higher than ours, and so we're really moderate tuition, but we're moderate tuition and a whole lot of aid. And those two things together then make it that it's not just a fraction of your students who get the benefit of the high aid, but in our case, 60%, 57% to be more accurate, 57% pay the equivalent of no tuition. And those things are really quite effective in allowing us to educate tens of thousands of students from low and moderate income families. We have about 40% or more of our students are Pell eligible. More than 40% of the incoming class will be the first generation students in their class. More than 40% of our incoming class will be students from underrepresented communities. And we can do all that at that scale because we adjust our policies to be able to get that balance. It means that we can educate thousands and thousands of students from backgrounds that generally were excluded from high-end education, and that's our mission, and we're pleased to be able to do that.
And I wanted to flag that racial diversity is a challenge, not just about student recruitment, but through multiple facets of the academy. Less than 17% of university presidents are people of color, and less than 9% of university presidents are Black. Can you talk about your lived experience as a person of color, a Black man, and how has that impacted your vision for the UC and your leadership style?
Well, that's a big question. We all live our lives as ourselves, and so it's hard to say what would your life be like if you were somebody else. I was born in a time of segregation. I began at totally segregated schools when I was in elementary school, and then we moved to a different neighborhood, moved to California, and then the schools were integrated, but often my brother and I would be the only ones, in different places. I, like everyone else who tells you this, was always told that you had to do more. It just meant doing your best. I don't know what it would be like to do less than your best. And so I've really focused on that quite heavily. I just always feel that the job that we have is to do the best we can for everyone and have that have the institutions continue to move forward. I will say something that's gratifying. I was doing a Zoom a few weeks ago with, I'd say, former mentee, someone who I recruited to the faculty at UCSF, who's now the chair of the department that I'm a professor in. So he's sort of my boss, I guess, which is a great thing. But he was hosting a group of African-American students in the MD PhD program at UCSF. And I'm going to forget exactly, but maybe there were 9 people on the screen. And that number sure used to be 0. And then it was for a long time 1 every once in a while. And so to have an actual collection of now several people who are focused on careers that will help them to be academic leaders in the professoriate, and actually to have my Zoom screen, filled up with them, that's something that just was unheard of in the history of our world 10, 12 years ago even. And so you can see things changing slowly, but making that progress. And I've always been interested in that and tried to do things that would help the inclusive pathway behind me be broader than the one that faced me. But knowing that many others are working on this is always gratifying, and seeing that we can make change, however slow, is something that is encouraging.
Yeah, that's great. And it's I think, as a Black woman, hearing that too, as we've gone through this global health, or going through this global pandemic, and hearing even small things about how the interactions between, medical research and race, and, the read the pulse oximeter. Doesn't work
Yes.
well for people of color, or if you're wearing nail polish. And that's probably a very trivial example, but thinking about having so many more MD, PhDs of color, it fills me with hope. I wanted to know how is the UC working to be a good partner with the CSU and the community colleges, and how could stronger coordination improve California's higher education?
We want to make transfer as smooth and seamless as possible. And now this year, I think it's always a little bit in the art of it, but roughly for our undergraduates, we accept 2 freshmen for every transfer student, or vice versa. So our incoming undergraduate class is about 1/3 transfer students. And that's mainly from from community colleges. But we're also thinking with CSU of training people who will be the professoriate of the future, people who do like you and go and get advanced degrees, and then be our faculty, but also the faculty for the CSU and for the community colleges. So that's an important part of what we're doing. And then we have more and more programs that we're doing. We're just starting these days, programs where we overlap and do things together. And I think that's going to be another way of us moving forward in the future, finding ways to have partnerships that allow us to do those things. So California, I think, is very lucky to have a robust community college system, an incredible set of institutions with the California State University system, largest state university system in the country. We're proud to be partners in that triumvirate and doing all we can to create pathways forward for post-secondary education for Californians.
And looking ahead, what are your most important priorities for the upcoming year?
Yeah, I mean, there's the today priority really, which is to return safely to the in-person experience that our students crave and that our faculty really appreciate. We expect about 85% or so. I'll know the number. I've been guessing that number for months. I'll know the number in a month or so, but I'm gonna, something like 85% of our classes will be in person, maybe more. So we want to get that to happen, have that work well, and then have it be safe. And so our return to class, return to work policies are very important. Our test, sequester, retest for students coming back to campus, our requirement that everyone have a vaccine so we can do everything we can to damp this down, and then that everyone wear masks, when indoors, as I have here with me. And we think that a vaccinated student body and faculty and staff wearing masks indoors should really damp down, really impede the ability of the virus to spread. And we should get down to really low numbers on our campuses by mid-October. And so we're going to do everything we can to make that true, and then learn this new way of living in parallel with the pandemic while it still rages around the country and around the world, until we can get fully on the other side, which we know is going to be quite some time to come. But so getting us back safely, that's critically important. And then I'm very interested, I'll say, in we've spent a lot of time thinking about our campus safety plan, the role of campus safety personnel, the role of police on campus, making us actively anti-racist in our behavior, not just non-racist, but really anti-racist in our behavior. So we think a lot about that, and that's a real opportunity for us. That's a real challenge for us. And then I'd say, lastly, just protecting the enthusiasm and mental health balance of all of our community, but particularly those in our health services who've had to do things that they would never expected to have to do over and over again. I think that among the most troubling is that we've had so many times when our healthcare workforce, our doctors or our nurses, had to stand in for the families of patients who were at the end of their lives because their families couldn't come to see them, and they had to set up a Zoom call or put the cell phone by someone's ear at this most impactful of moments in life. And that's awful for everyone. Doing it over and over again is a burden that I think that our healthcare workforce has carried with great grace and sensitivity, but that's a weight, as you do that over and over again. So we want to make sure to embrace and support them as we're moving through this, and hopefully get to the end as soon as we can.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. We look forward to seeing the UC move forward. I think given particularly your leadership around the health sciences, like how you move forward on these priorities you've just named too, I think will be really informative as other educational institutions and frankly other organizations, period, are trying to figure out the same things for the communities they serve and for their staff. So I, again, just want to say I appreciate your time with us today and your leadership in our state.
Well, thank you very much. And I look forward to us all being able to be in rooms together at the same time when that occurs. Since we're neighbors in working close by, that would be great. And I really appreciate the work that California Competes does. It's really doing a lot to help us be a more equitable and racially just workforce and post-secondary education community. And so thanks very much for all that you do and look forward to continuing to work with you.
Welcome.